Word on this just to warn you. So a few years ago, shall we say, I was delighted to meet Alisa Herodes, who came in and did lots of research on her family and shared so many things. It was wonderful. And she has continued her whole penchant for her family and her family background, and is today a member of the Little Shell tribe. And am I not correct that you are also a councilwoman?
That is correct.
Okay, I want you to face that.
That is correct.
She's doing way better at it than I am. Okay, she is here to tell us a fascinating story of people who were forgotten over time, at least by certain members of the public. And today they have been remembered. And today there is a memorial for them at Lewistown at a cemetery. So without further ado, Alisa, I'm going to allow you to get started.
Thank you, Jan. So I'm going to talk a little about who the Metis are. I'm guessing a lot of you probably know, but I'm just going to kind of tell my story this way. The Metis, in simple terms, were a mix of Indigenous and European ancestry, mostly from the men coming down to work for Hudson Bay, the Scots, and the French Canadian, or the Canadian. They weren't French Canadian at the time, but the French came over and worked for the Hudson Bay. And the women that they married were predominantly Sultano, Cree, and Ojibwe. The Métis, before you even saw the Métis coming, you would hear the Métis coming. They would travel in these big Red River carts with these two big wheels, and they were bound with leather that was shrunk to hold the wheels together, and that was wood on wood, so they creaked as they came across the prairies or anywhere. The carts are basically called Red River carts, and this helped the Métis also with bison. They weren't restricted just to hunt bison on the river. They were able to do it on the plains also. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Métis sash. So the Métis sash, so once you saw the Métis, heard the Métis coming, you saw them, the women didn't really wear them. They do now in ceremony or at events across the shoulder, but the men would wear them as a belt, tied on a belt. And their sashes, and they're different colors. They're called the Assumption sash or the Arrow sash or the Métis sash. It's basically pretty predominant way of knowing them. So, and the colors all mean different things. So the outside red stands for obviously bloodshed and battle. The black stands for dark times. The yellow is prosperity. The blue is the flag or the spirit. And then the white is for peace and harmony. And this red down the middle, they consider the Red River itself. So up in Manitoba, where the Red River colony is now Manitoba, up in Canada. So they had these. And then there's the Métis flag, and it's this infinity symbol, white on blue or white on red. And when I was first starting to learn about the Métis, I heard that the flag, the blue was for Hudson Bay and the red was for the competitor, the Northwest Company. And that sounds right. But then I heard the blue is for when times of peace and the red's for times of war. Well, just a couple months ago, I had a friend from up in Canada send me this article about the flag, and it was basically the color of fabric that was available. When they ran out of blue, they used red. And I know that's not as romantic, but it's probably true because I know it dates way back. And this flag actually predates the Canadian maple leaf flag up in Canada. The music. So I'm going to play, I actually brought it wasn't even a CD player. It was a cassette player. I didn't even know I owned the animal, but that doesn't work so much. But I'm going to play a little bit of the Red River Jig. I don't know if you can hear it or not. There you go. Love it. All right. Listen to that all day, actually. So the music itself is kind of a unique blend of the dance and the music. So the music they crafted is a blend of Scottish and First Nations rhythm played on a fiddle. Although it may sound like an out of tune fiddle, it is very intentional, the sound. And along with the music is the dance style. And best way I can describe it, it's like the Scottish jig married the powwow dance step. So it's low to the ground, and they don't do a lot of upper body movement at all. And just fascinating to watch when people can do it. I kind of had my jig down for a while, but then I broke it, so I don't know what happened to it. But I'm going to talk about the families that are in the monument itself. So in 1879, 25 Métis families led by Pierre Berger traveled from Milk River in Alberta to Fort Benton and finally settled in Lewistown, Montana. They settled along Spring Creek, thus founding Lewistown, Montana. In 2014, I heard from someone that there was a mass grave of Métis people in the Calvary Cemetery, and I kind of passed it off as folklore. You know, you hear stories and you're like, yeah, that happened, you know, and it's like, just smile. Yeah. Well, then, like the following year, I was at the Métis celebration in Lewistown, which they hold every year during Labor Day weekend. And my relatives, I was having breakfast with them, and they said something about the mass graves of Métis. And I'm like, now tell me a little more. What do you know? And they kind of said, well, there's just the mass graves. And I'm like, okay, how did they get there and why? But nobody could really tell me that. I said, well, show me the spot when we're done with breakfast. So we went up there, and they show me the back corner of the cemetery at Calvary. And there are no headstones there. There are some along the perimeter, and then there's a big empty space, and then some more graves. And there's obviously kind of divots in the ground. So I'm like, okay, this could be. And then I did some digging and found an article in the News Argus dated August 16th, 1894, where it says 28 half-breeds exhumed from Jacob Corberly's property, many more to follow. So the Métis where they had settled, they lost their, and I'm not sure how they lost their property. I thought it was nefarious, but the more I dig into family history, I found out the Corberlys and the Bergers were friends. So this Pierre Berger is my great-great-grandfather. And there's photos of them in the late 20s and early 30s having birthday parties together. So I don't know that it was taken away from them. I think Wilkie's, who owned that property where the grave sat, just never filed a homestead act, never drove to, I guess it would have been White Sulphur Springs, and just got it done. And I think it's because he did move back and forth a lot, back to North Dakota and that area where his family's at in Turtle Mountain. So after finding that little article, there's just some great credibility to oral history that I just, shoved aside, which shame on me for that, because there's obviously merit to it. But it was probably, I don't know, months later or something. I woke up in the middle of the night as I had a dream, and I wake up my husband and I'm like, hey, there needs to be a memorial. And he goes, what? There's a memorial up there. And your story needs to be told. And he's just like, we'll talk about it tomorrow, kind of thing. So I got a hold of the same people that I had breakfast with, and the Métis elders that I knew, and said, let's do this. And they're like, that's a great idea. Let's do this. And apparently it had been talked about before. And I think they even brought it to the church, but I think they were kind of expecting the church to do it. I'm not sure on that, but 120 years without grave markers. But then again, I'm not sure there wasn't ones. They were probably all had grave markers, but 120 years of Montana's harsh environment probably took care of that. So I wrote a letter to St. Leo's Church, and they said we have to wait for to see if we could actually build a monument and put it up there. And we weren't thinking very big, but just something that told the story. And the cemetery committee had to meet and discuss it. So it was about 6-7 months later, they said, okay, you can do it. And I'm like, oh, that's great. So charge forth, and 9 years it took to do it. But I don't think that's that bad when there's people that work full-time jobs and weren't really actively working on it. And then just the things that happen just kind of all happened at once. And I was having dinner with Chairman Gray of the Little Shell Tribe and one of the tribal attorneys from DC. And I was like, oh yeah, there's some funding available. And I think we got it. It's like, $54,000, and that's great. And Gerald's like, well, we can do the stone. And I'm like, what? We have that quarry in Idaho. I go, yeah, you do, but it's travertine. Can you make a monument out of that? And he goes, yes, they do it all the time. I was thinking it was friable, not something you can do. And honestly, when we picked out the color, and they're just listing off the different colors, and I'm like, did you say buckskin? I'm like, buckskin, that's our color. That's the color we want. Well, they did come back to me and say, that is too soft of a rock for outdoors, but you can do this one and this one. And one was called Continental Buff. And I'm like, oh, that's like buffalo. I'm like, yeah, let's go with Continental Buff. So that's what our monument's out of. So searching Montana Memory Project, and also the diocese in Billings, Montana, has an article written by Elizabeth Berger Swan. And she wrote down the details of the whole, like she lived it. So she wrote it down. And basically she writes that, that Jacob Corbally ended up with the property. The Metis families did move on to different areas. And so the Corbally went to Father Van de Hubble, who was St. Leo's priest at the time. And obviously, if you've been to Lewistown and you've seen St. Leo's, that brick structure wasn't built till 1916. So this was a wood church, basically. And he went to Father Van de Hubble and said, I'm going to run my livestock. We should probably do something with these graves. So Father Van de Hubble, who was from, I believe, Belgium, so he spoke French like the Métis did, and obviously English also. So he had a kinship with them already, because the Métis are predominantly Catholic. And he talked with his friends, and they agreed to exhume the graves and rebury them on consecrated ground. So that was 1894 when that happened. But somebody found a document that said that the Ouellette family, Antony and Angelique Ouellette, lost their young daughter. So in 1891, they actually deeded a piece of property to the church for the purposes of that cemetery, for a cemetery. And that is St. Leo's Calvary Cemetery. So that was actually given by Métis family, which is very cool to find that out. So with the help of Father Van de Hubble, the men worked day and night to exhume the graves. I guess at some point, some were so deteriorated, they used shovels and built new caskets for them and reburied them in Calvary Cemetery on the consecrated ground. And then they had a 2-day requiem mass down the aisles of St. Leo's. And when mass was concluded, they had their burial there. And again, I'm sure there were graves at the time. And I just appreciate so much as Elizabeth Swan knew to write down her family history. And she wrote several different articles, but this one just, like, other than that blurb of like 4 sentences in the News Argus that doesn't tell a very pretty story, this is a beautiful one. And I do have copies of it if somebody wants the whole her written out part. She called it God's Acre because they're definitely Catholic, and she was about 90 years old when she passed in 1971, and she's also buried in Calvary Cemetery, but not in that old part. So I want to show you what well, this is an old picture. This is actually a family photo I have. And it was when we started raising money, we kind of talked about we're raising money for a monument and why we're doing it, kind of short and sweet. But I was going to get this same size. Oh, sorry. You're good. Right here. And I was going to get this same size for this, but Staples today, when I picked this up, they must have thought this monument was so beautiful that they made a huge one.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is about how tall I am to it when I stand by it. So it's fairly tall. We are so proud of this, and it took a village, or rather a tribe and people, to make this happen. And there was a lot of people involved. And one of the first donations we ever received was when I got up and talked at a Metis celebration in Lewistown. And again, kudos to the La Fountain family for doing that memorial or that Metis gathering for 40 years now. I think it's been 43 years. I a little not sure what to think of the Metis celebration and powwow being all one, but Friday night is mostly the jigging and the fiddling and the contests for that, and then powwow on Saturday and Sundays. But it is a nice blend because we are all one people. I mean, basically, we're all one people. And yeah, I just love that they take that on. It's so much work for them to do that. But that first donation of $100 we received from Robert Labrador and family, and excuse my language, but John LaFountain said, "That's pretty good seed money." I go, "I know, isn't it great?" And he goes, "Those people don't have a pot to piss in." Sorry. and he goes, "That is," I'm like, then that was so meaningful to me for them to want to tell the story about their families, that was great seed money. It went from that to $72,000. And that's Little Shell Tribe donating that stone, so that money in kind as well as others. Zeller Family Trust did the first of the big sum of the 54, which was to etch the stone and actually transport it here. And so many people involved. And honestly, if you guys know Candy Zion, she wrote a book about the Métis, a couple of them now. And she had interviewed me, and I actually said, "Well, I don't have that great of a story." I said, "But I know of a good story." And I told her this one. And then I said, "I also know some people that really live the Métis life. And if you don't have their names, let me share them with you and make sure that it's okay if I pass their information along." And she's the one that had the contact with Zeller. So that was just, like I said, it took a lot of people, and it was just very special to me. And there's so many names here that you would recognize of people that you grew up with: LaFountain, Lavador, Fleury, Charette, Wilkie, LaFramboise, Willette, Chartier, Turcotte, well, Juno is Ameline, Beauchamp, Wells, yeah, Barak. There's just so many clients. Dumont. So another interesting, so if you know, during the Red River Rebellion, yeah, there you go, yeah. During the Red River Rebellion up in Canada, another article, because when I put Métis in and or then half-breed kept coming up, so I Googled half-breed, and that's where I got that one article. But yeah, it was interesting that I also saw an article that said that during the Red River Rebellion, the News Argus said, "We're keeping an eye on them down here, so in case they want to cause any trouble too," and I was like, geez, it was just interesting history. But the Red River Rebellion is led by Louis Riel, and Louis Riel's military commander was Gabriel Dumont. And Gabriel Dumont's wife, Madeline, is one of the people buried in that mass reburial. So it's not a mass grave, it's a mass reburial, even though I try not to say mass grave because it's a total different connotation. And that's just how I first heard it. But some funny stories was we were ready to plant this. Actually, this structure got placed 3 o'clock on Thursday, and September 1st, Friday at 3 was our unveiling. So it was a really tight one. And we had when I met the cemetery committee and Father Samuel, who's from St. Leo's, and the caretaker up at St. Leo's to figure out where we're actually going to place this, because we kind of need their okay, it's their property. And we decided on a place, but it was a little iffy because again, there's this lip. Well, September of 2022, we did some ground penetrating radar and planted, I think there was 30 to 40 flags, just little white flags of where there were graves. And it was such a suspect area that we're like, let's just do it again to be sure. We don't want to unearth anybody's remains. So we were fine where we were at. We had to maybe move it down a foot. But the Mason met us there, and I kept kind of hounding him. Give us a bid. How much is it going to cost? How much is it going to cost? Give us a bid. So he had to go 4 feet down. So 4 feet into the ground by 2 feet by 12 feet is the size underneath the ground. And he just never got in. We're just getting that smaller and smaller timeline. But I did find Marathon Construction there in Lewistown. He goes, I can do it. And he goes, might cost you a little more because I have to put you ahead of another job I've already scheduled. I'm like, that's fine. We need it done. And they did a fabulous job. I finally said, how much do you want? Half down? What do you want? And he says, a third. So I mailed a check for $1,800. And I said, let me know when you get it, because I want you to start as soon as you can. And he goes, well, I could start as, right away. I trust that the check's in the mail, but I have to wait for, licensing. I gotta make sure I have everything set with the county so I can do this, construction job. And I said, you're digging a hole in the cemetery. It's fine. Just dig the hole. And I'm like, don't wait. I'm like, gosh, I hope nobody's listening, but but it's also a blessing we found him, because he did a great job. And maybe it did cost us a little more, but he did a great job. But it also gave us a few more days to find names. Like, instead of these women being Mrs. Jean Baptiste LaFountain, like she's the last one, we're like, who is she? I don't want to type Mrs. And there's, I think, 4 or 5 of them. And obviously Mrs. Gabrielle Dumont. Okay, Madeline Wilkie Dumont, I know her, I'm related. So I was like, yeah, that's easy. But Mrs. Jean Baptiste LaFountain, and it's like, who is she? And digging around, and somebody came into work and said, hey, do you have a copy of your family tree? I'm like, sure. I'm like, which pages? Because it's thick and I'm not going to print it all out. Because Nicholas Roman, one country, or the whole country, the whole country was one robe.
The whole country was one robe.
And anyway, so he did this thumb drive, and it's pages and pages long. And I said, well, what section? And if I'm not looking at something that said Jean Baptiste LaFountain got married and to Wilkie's daughter, and I'm like, what? I'm like, is there something there? Well, this is beyond my pay grade. I don't trust my genealogy work. So I got a hold of Johnny Kroll, who lives in Spokane, and she does a lot of genealogy for the Little Shell tribe as well as enrollment. And I'm like, I'm sending you this page. We got to find this, because she actually helped me find the other misses. And she called me back and she goes, let me introduce Mrs. Josephine Wilkie LaFountain. And I was like, so yeah, the whole cry thing. And our unveiling went beautifully. I asked Norman Fleury up in Canada to come and speak. He writes books, and he is a dynamic speaker. Little Shell Chris Latreille, who's just been a month now named Montana Poet Laureate. And I was like, is this your first speaking gig since being named that? And he goes, no, but it'll be the first time I've been introduced as Montana Poet Laureate. And I was like, good. and Candy Zion, and then another gentleman from Canada who works for the housing up there, and he did some great. They just were such great speakers. And the one thing that Flurry, I just loved it. He goes, the Métis were really good ranchers, and I'm like, okay. And he goes, yeah, they manage 60 to 70 million head of buffalo. I'm just like, and then of course we laugh. And this gust of wind comes up, and this is how funny this guy is. The gust of wind comes up, and the flag is flapping, all the flags we have out there. And he goes, "Oh, look, even the flags are clapping." He's great. Yeah, I think that's kind of it. We are still actively, not that this is a hint, but we're still actively, no, I don't know that we are still actively raising money. I think we're going to be okay. We are going to put a sprinkler system up there because we did lay turf. I was like, oh my gosh. When I saw pictures of them digging, I knew somebody was bending over 4 feet, that this 2-foot hole that needed to be dug probably needed to be 4 feet. So we got turf laid like right after the monument was placed, practically. The guy from Snowy Mountain came up there and laid turf, and yeah, it was a labor of love. So many people involved, and it was so moving. So I was I won't say master of ceremonies because I know my speaking abilities, but I basically kind of just said, who are the Métis? Short and sweet. How did these people get here? And then introduce the speakers. But what was I going to say? Help me out, Jan. But
you're doing wonderfully.
Yeah, thanks.
You are.
Yeah, it was just really, I'm like, I hope I can hold it together. And that there was just under 200 people in attendance that came to that, and I only was initially getting 50 chairs. And so I called the rental in Lewistown and said, we need more chairs. Thank goodness. And then also put online, if you're coming, powwow people, they're going to bring their chairs. Bring your chairs to the cemetery too. So just have a place to sit. Oh gosh, I had one more thing to say, but I guess.
How many, so you've been able to identify a lot of the people?
There you go. So Elizabeth Swan writes that there's about 72 buried there, and she could remember 36 of them. So I think Jan, no, or when I retire, that we will help hopefully find more names. And I think it's possible if we can find, Josephine's name, I think that we can kind of track down, with the help of these fine ladies,
we can
and gentlemen, find more names, and that money that we do have in reserve. The dust quite hasn't settled with everything yet. Some of the small bills are still coming in, so we don't know where we're at, but we're going to do that. And then also we were going to do pylons on the back side of it because it's just right near the road, and I wanted it protected. And so I called Becky Jackson, who's cemetery committee chair, and I said, Becky, is it okay if we put in pylons or something up there? I'd like to see some stone. And she goes, well, let me do some checking. She called me back and she goes, we've got 12 big rocks that are like 14 inches high by 14 to 20 inches wide. We will donate, she goes, from our property. And her husband's Knights of Columbus, so she voluntold him that he's going to take these rocks and bring them up and plant them. So that's pretty awesome. But yeah, like again, it just took everybody, and I did hold it together. So emotional to me, and just to people go up and touch it and just almost pray on it, and touch where their family was and get photos with their family touching the names. It was so moving. And it wasn't until Sunday when we had a little mass and blessing from Father Samuel came up there. And when he started sprinkling the holy water, that's when I lost it. So thank gosh, it was a sunny day and I had sunglasses on. And so but it was very moving.
So, when you investigated this, did you look in the old Fergustown history book for the names?
No, I didn't. It was basically let's get this monument placed and hopefully.
Because there are some lists there. I'm not sure of what is there,
Oh,
but I've
that's great.
re-indexed that book.
Okay.
So the names of but the ladies, the nuns that were there also did some work with some of that. And we'll just have to look and see, but maybe we can help with this a little bit.
Awesome.
We'll see.
Yeah. And who loves Elizabeth Swan? You guys get it, don't you? Write it down. Write it down.
You
All
too.
right. Yeah, I know exactly.
Write it down. 'Cause
Okay.
she still has a whole suitcase full, a trunk
Oh
full,
my
wonderful
gosh.
things
Mhm.
that she has found in her family. I want to thank you so much for
Oh,
sharing, because this is wonderful, and being able to see the actual monument.
No.
And I know I'm going to go to Lewistown.
Yeah.
You know, the Bobster, my husband, is always looking for a place to go, and he said he wanted to go see the Boy Scout camp down there. Well, we're stopping in Lewistown first.
Perfect. And there are some of the Métis that they actually came up on a couple of buses to Lewistown for the monument and the celebration, and brought some stuff, and they said pass these out. So here's any of this little Michif dictionary, and just quick, Michif is the Métis language, and it's also kind of a mix of French and Cree and just a little bit of everything. So with that, I'll end with oh, you have a question, Deanna?
I just have a comment, because with NAPA, the Native American Tribes and Education Act, we are just beginning to discover how precious it is to have this for about the ancestors. When, like, the University of California has 70,000 bones still in their university archives, and nobody knows who they are. For each Native American who doesn't know, this is a miracle that you could find this much and that it was there, and now it's going to bless all of the descendants
Right.
of these people.
Right.
So it's just a comment, and I consider what you did a real miracle for all of the
Yeah,
people.
it took a tribe, I say, a people. Yeah, definitely.
And she's
So-
sitting right next to the little tan yellow books over there,
Yes.
1 through 11, that have all of these names in them, because a lady by the name of Gail Moran has been working on Métis, various histories, and we have all those books. We actually have about 60 of her books in here, I think, in 5
Yeah,
series.
she's amazing.
That's just one, but these names that she's
Oh.
introduced us to that are in there, yeah, there you go.
I could show you a photo of Pierre and his wife in this book.
So the names are here, and this is one of the things we're doing. Next month, we will have Indigenous families in here, we hope, finding out a little more about their history. And we're preparing handouts that will, I hope they'll be permanent
Yeah,
handouts,
yeah.
because they're really going to help our librarians
Pierre
just to be able to
Berger.
say quickly, your family is in this book or this. And I warn you, they cross over to all 11 books. And then once you find those, then we have back here in the Canadian section, we have all the French materials from Quebec, from many of these original families. And so we have a great deal here in this library. So,
And what I found from my own Blackfeet daughter is you go back to the end of the moment, and there's the death right there. That's it.
Yeah.
All the farther that the Blackfeet go back. And then it is at that point that you need these kind of materials.
and Nicholas Nicholas Vrooman did such a fantastic job with the history. And I remind people that this is what got this book of Nicholas's that he did is the one which every congressperson and every senator had at one point. Anyway,
Really?
yeah, they all did, because this is what won them over in terms of deciding that, yes, this was a legitimate tribe. So this history is, it's a very sacred thing. His materials are great, and his thumb drive is magnificent.
Right.
We have a copy by the way. Yeah, it's been here. and well taken
Yeah,
care of.
Yeah.
And we're trying to get this republished right now because it's like I told her, I said, I hate seeing a book out there for $1,700. Right now it's out of print.
Ridiculous.
What?
Her
Yeah.
paperback, yeah,
Yeah.
even though it's fabulous, it's still.
1,700?
He has a question. Yeah, I'd like to see that. Okay, I'm done. You guys have a meeting.